Hi, my name is Elizabeth Shreeve, and I write science books for kids. I'm here today with Sierra Satterstrom, STEM teacher who co-created curriculum for my last couple of books with me, and we're going to talk about the Upside-Down Book of Sloths, and more generally, we're going to talk about how you can use nonfiction books for teaching language arts lessons in the classroom. See if we get this to go. And here we are. Sierra works in San Escondido.
Yep.
I live up in Mill Valley in Northern California. And Sierra, your school is now called the
Conway Academy of Expeditionary Learning. But we're a public school in Escondido, which is near San Diego.
Right.
So
take it away, Sierra.
Yeah. When Elizabeth and I were first starting to talk and sharing information about her books and curriculum, I was actually also sharing just how challenging it is to teach science, because with all of the testing that happens, very few time is allotted for science. So this slide is just showing that in 2018, there was a survey that was done, and in a kinder through third grade classroom, students are getting taught an average of 18 minutes a day of science. And that doesn't mean they're getting science daily. So for example, at my prior school, we would do 6 weeks learning about science-based curriculum, and then we would do 6 weeks of social studies, and then back and forth. So really the kids only got a little bit of science half of the year, but it averages out to about 18 minutes, which is astoundingly low. And then only about a third of students are considered proficient in science. So this is an example of a reading passage, and I'll just read the first couple lines of it, but you guys can read it as well. And it's actually from an assessment, and it says, in one of the most remote places in the world, the Canadian Arctic people have survived over 1,000 years. They are the Inuit. For the Inuit, the Arctic is a place teeming with life. Depending on how far they live, the Inuit find everything from caribou herds and polar bears to beluga whales. So if you are a third grader without having any knowledge, this is what they are seeing. So when they're looking through it, they're going to look at these words and have no baseline, no content knowledge. And so they're not going to know what this passage is about. And so when they're then testing students on these skills and doing a reading comprehension, they're losing so many of them because they don't have this knowledge. So what Elizabeth and I and teachers are trying to do is get more content into the classroom so that students are able to have that prior knowledge. So just kind of the reality is it's a knowledge gap, not a skill gap. If we're focusing forever on the skills without getting that knowledge, it's going to be harder for them to be able to improve their reading and comprehension levels. So we want to practice both of them together to help students find success. So this is Elizabeth and I when we presented at a conference together. She's fantastic at networking with other author friends and finding different books. And so we presented about how to use science to teach the Common Core standards. And then these are some of the books that we've brought that I'm lucky enough to have in my science classroom. And on the side, there's little pictures. You can see these are my students working on some of the activities that were in Elizabeth's original book or one of her prior books, Out of the Blue. So this is all about the history of the Earth.
Right. Thanks, Sierra. So when the Upside-Down Book of Sloths came out, just about 6 weeks ago, I reached out to Sierra to see if she would help with a teacher guide for that book as well. And we had sort of come up with this idea about how books can help kids build on what they know. It's like a tree growing. So you build from what they know, and then you get them to ask questions. discover more, and then look for ways to create and share their knowledge. So it's an inquiry-based approach that also helps with language arts and sort of slips in science there through the cracks in a kind of indirect way. Now, it's not limited to this particular book. You can swap in, a teacher can swap in any book that, depending on what their kids are interested in. Their kids might be interested in space, in rocket ships, in underwater discovery, in chemistry, in a physicist's life. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's a model for how you can build from curiosity to learning. And this is the teacher guide that we came up with. It's short. And what it does, I think, really nicely is really uses the science with activities that Sierra provided in a way that a teacher can kind of slip it into the classroom and use the book for teaching language arts. Here you'll see that Sierra kind of identified these Common Core as something that we do use in California, or teachers use in California. I'll let you go through that, Sierra. I think you're on mute, Sierra.
Thank you. So when I was putting together this curriculum, I decided to use standards that were language arts standards instead of science standards. Because as you saw, it talks about we only get 18 minutes of science a day. Teachers have to find a way to put it into their classroom. So when they can align it with language arts, that's how we can work the system to get the science in there. So these are just an example of some of the standards that are from 4th grade standards. But when you look at them, the CCSS is the Common Core state standards. These are the national standards that were sent out probably like a decade ago now. And then states adopted them. Most states did, some opted out. And then at the very last little section of it where it says RI, that's reading informational. The 4 is the grade, and then the last number is the standard. So a lot of them where it's like RI1 will be very similar from 2nd, 3rd, 4th up and going up the grades. So you can see some of the standards that are addressed in the activities that are written are practicing referring to details and examples when explaining what happens, using evidence and reasoning to support your support your point for something, learning how to do research. These are just some of the kind of ways that we wanted to do it. And then I also, as I have a large minority population, and so we're always working really hard with speaking and listening. So there's also some speaking and listening standards that we put in that go about at the very end, most specifically when they're sharing their learning with others.
So building on that sort of know, wonder, discover, these activities are organized in that fashion.
Yeah. So in the sections, it's kind of like for teachers, we were taught about a KWL chart, which is what do I know, what do I want to know, and what do I learn, or what did I learn? And so what we tried to do was take that and make it a more in-depth, impactful version. And so some of the things that we have in the know is what do you know about sloths? What do you know about fossils? And then that wonders, what are some things that you're hoping to know? And these are all things that you do prior to even introducing the text. And then in that discover, this is where they can start to learn more about the book. So teachers have to teach text features. And so there's a text feature scavenger hunt. There's a picture gallery walk, which the kids love to do, just to flip through and look at the pictures. Jigsaw reading is a really good one that I recommend because a lot of times when kids are looking at nonfiction books, they see a lot of text and they kind of panic. But the nice part, the beautiful way that Elizabeth arranged the book is that it's chunked really well. So what you can do for jigsaw reading is you can assign one group to read just about this specific sloth and be ready to share that information with another group. And all of the kids can study tiny little parts of the book so that they can understand what's going on. It's not as, it just has a lot of flexibility to it, which is great. So then after they've got that knowledge, then they get into the create area. And this is where they're kind of digesting their knowledge and being able to present it to others to share what they've learned about. So probably my favorite one on there is the Sloth Wanted poster, where you could draw a picture of the sloth and then details about the sloth. And I thought it would be super cute if they post them around campus so the kids are seeing lost, missing sloth or wanted sloth, last seen in the trees and looks like, and just kind of using their opportunities of where they might see one of these sloths. And then this is one of the charts that was created for compare and contrast. And so we just put two different ones of the tree sloths versus the ground sloths. And then the students can work with another group that studied the different sloths to kind of figure out the differences between them.
Right, thanks. So I'll run quickly through how I use this when I present to classrooms or teachers, starting with sort of what do you know about sloths? And kids know that sloths are incredibly cute and they live upside down. Probably know that. That's what I knew. As a writer, this is my process that I go through also. I knew that sloths used to be a lot bigger, like this fantastic, famous Megatherium in the Natural History Museum in London. And then I watched a couple of videos that really got me excited, PBS Eon's videos about how sloths used to swim in the ocean. And of course, sloths that poop themselves to death, like how could kids resist a giant sloth that pooped themselves to death? So I thought that was pretty cool. So that's kind of what I knew. And then when I wondered, I asked questions, and to me, the asking of questions is really a big part of the creative part of writing a book, and also the creative part of just learning and curiosity. Excuse me. Why are sloths so slow? What do they eat? Why were prehistoric sloths so big? And what happened to them? And what's up with the fantastic and weird and strange and fabulous animals of South America? Why are they so different? So those are some of the questions that I wanted to answer. So then I get, as a nonfiction writer, I get into my discovery process. How can I discover more about sloths? And of course, I set off to do a lot of reading. I went to Costa Rica and went to a refuge where sloths are taken care of. And sloths are usually up in the trees because they are really expert at camouflage. But if you go to a place where they're being taken care of, a refuge, you get to see them up close, and they're really, really amazing. I reached out to Dr. Greg McDonald, who gave a presentation for ASASG last week. He's an expert in ground sloths. And he was always been so helpful. And Dr. Mariella Superina, who is here on this webinar today. And she was great and really helped by reviewing manuscripts and putting me in contact with people. I also went down to La Brea Tar Pits. Right here in California, we have the tar pits and fantastic collection of sloth fossils. And Dr. Emily Lindsay, a paleontologist there, also reviewed manuscripts and steered me in the right direction. And we did a great presentation on International Sloth Weekend recently at the La Brea Tar Pits. It had a lot of people wandering around, had a panel. And here's one of their exhibits with a saber-toothed cat jumping up on a giant ground sloth model. I also got to look at giant ground sloth coprolite, the fossilized dung, down in the basement of the Smithsonian Museum, which was just really, really great. And of course, scientists learn a lot from coprolite. And when I talk to students, they talk about what can scientists learn from coprolite. All about food and diet and ecological conditions. the question of South America is just so fascinating, and it's not something I got into a lot in the book, but I think the movement of continents through plate tectonics over time is so incredible, and what the implications are for diversification of animals and plants on different continents. So that's something I'd love to share with students. So then you have a whole bunch of knowledge, and a student would have a whole bunch of information gathered about their topic of choice. But you then have the chance to share that in different ways. What a nonfiction writer like me sometimes does is look for different structures in a book, different ways of organizing information. And for this book, I used a kind of contrast and compare chart. This is one of my many working diagrams, but always keeping in mind, like, what is that central idea of this book? What is the premise and main idea of this book? You write a draft and send it off to your editor. You start to get images back from the illustrator. In this case, cut them up, moved them around a lot, trying to make sure that the information did have that structure that Sierra mentioned. And you get some preliminary ideas back and some preliminary pages with illustrations. And then you get finally a book. And the sloths are slow, sleepy, weirdly adorable. If you love sloths, you might know that there are 6 different types all hanging out in the treetops of Central and South America. But did you know, and this is kind of the central question of the book, there used to be dozens of others, amazing, enormous, and unlike any other animals in the world. Well, hold on tight to that branch, because everything you thought about sloths is about to turn upside down. So that's the opening page of the book. And the book shows the 6 living sloths of our world and compares, in this case, the smallest one, the little pygmy sloth, to the biggest of the Megatherium that was huge. It was the size of an elephant. And another comparison, sloths today are leaf munchers. They eat leaves, like the maned sloth. But long, long ago, some sloths were ocean foragers. And they roamed off the coast of Central America, off the west coast of Pacific coast of South America, and in the seagrass. And that's how they adapted, and that's how they survived a period of climate stress and very dry, hot conditions in South America. So they became semi-aquatic, kind of like sea lions. So that is how the book took shape. And here's my loyal dog, Hector the Paleo dog, reading the book. And next year we have the Oddball Book of Armadillos coming out that Mariella was really helpful in preparing this book, which is now getting illustrated and will come out in fall 2024. So that is it.
Hi, everyone. I am Kenny Coogan, and I am the Education Coordinator for the International Union of Conservation of Nature Species Survival Commission for the Anteater, Sloth, and Armadillo Specialist Group. And we call those 3 groups of animals Xenarthrans. Our website is xenarthrans.org, and we have an active Instagram and Facebook social media, as well as YouTube. And on our YouTube page, we post all of our past webinars, as well as some really exciting educational content, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. If you go to our website, xenarthrans.org, you will see we have 38 species profiles for armadillo, sloths, and anteaters. We have descriptions, habitat and ecology, reproduction, diets, ranges, their conservation status, and all of this is kind of at the high school or the college level. But recently, we added some educational components for kids. We have 4 animated videos. We have 1 on each of our taxonomic groups, and then we have 1 video on the past, present, and the future of Xenarthrans. So you can see some really cool glyptodons and Megatherium and giant ground sloths and things like that. With those videos, we also have activities that we encourage you to print and utilize. We also have some digital activities like coloring pages, but you can print these word searches and crosses and spot the differences out. They are available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and they're all for free. We want to remind you to save the date. International Armadillo Day is always August 13th. International Sloth Day is the third Saturday in October, which means every year the date changes. And World Anteater Day is always the day of November 19th. If you go to our website or if you go to our social media, you will see the list of upcoming webinars. A lot of them are about conservation and field studies. Some of them are about their captive care, as well as some educational content. If you work with Xenarthrans, or if you see Xenarthrans in the wild and you have great photos that you want us to share, if you made a cake that looks like an armadillo, if you made little figurines that look like a sloth, send us them at contact@xenarthrans.org, and we would be happy to share those on our social media to promote how wonderful Xenarthrans are. Our website is available in all 3 languages, like I mentioned, and at the top you'll see there's a donate button. If you feel inspired to conserve these wonderful animals, you can click that donate button, and all of that money goes to our conservation and our education initiatives. Or if you don't want to just give the money outright, you can buy some of our Xenarthran merch, and you can see I am wearing a beautiful long sleeve maned sloth t-shirt right now. They're my favorite type of sloth. But as you know, there's lots of Xenarthrans. There's about 40 of them. So we have lots of different styles. We have hoodies and mugs and t-shirts and tote bags and stickers. And if you purchase this, like I mentioned, all of the proceeds go to our specialist group. But send us a picture of your new merch and we might share it. We have 2 partner institutions. We have FIA, the Foundation for International Aid to Animals, and Nurtured by Nature, and they are proud supporters of our Xenarthran specialist group, and they help fund our educational content as well as our webinars. So we thank them profusely. And now back to our program.
Just looking at that extinct sea sloth, just like the skull. Can you talk a little bit about what resources the illustrator was given?
Well, I provided a lot of what we call reference images to the illustrator. And Isabella Grott, I should mention that this was published by Norton Young Readers, and the illustrator was Isabella Grott, who actually lives in Italy. She lives in Florence. So I provided folders of images and lots of reference images. And then she also did research herself. And I love this image because it's not easy to illustrate sloths. They're kind of lumpy and brown and they're very well camouflaged. Mariella's smiling, but so this image provided a nice opportunity for the illustrator to go into a different color range with the blues and the greens of that aquatic environment. So, but there was probably the most work of editing and revising this book came with organizing the material into the sort of old, new, old, and then with content spreads that filled in other information. Because I somehow had this idea that I could pack all kinds of stuff into one spread, but my editor pulled things out. And so that's why there was that shot of sort of, reorganizing material, literally just printed out an early draft, cut it into pieces and taped it together on my kitchen table. Because sometimes that's the easiest way to organize information.
For teachers,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say for teachers who only have 18 minutes a day for science, but there's time for reading and they're using nonfiction. I mean, that's your goal, to use nonfiction to incorporate science into it. What do you think teachers are missing to make that science connection? Like Sierra was mentioning, like they don't know a third of these words, but is there another overlying aspect that teachers keep missing, or that they could be utilizing better to instruct their students?
So I think that's what we're trying to provide in conferences when we speak to them, is showing them that there are ways to do it besides just the standard textbook. What has happened a lot, so I spent 10 years in the gen ed classroom before transitioning over to the STEM position. But what was happening is that after No Child Left Behind was passed and they wanted to get everybody to be passing the same tests, it became teaching to the tests. And so teachers are starting to have to find ways to teach these things and still give them content knowledge. So Elizabeth and I didn't meet until after I was out of the gen ed classroom. But the way that we designed it is the way I would envision it in a gen ed classroom is when they're doing small groups, the teacher's pulling a group to work on a specific skill for the testing aspect, but then the students are working in small groups, learning about these different content pieces. And then they're going to rotate through and do different ideas and pieces that they study. So I think the hardest part is getting appealing things into the classroom that's interesting to kids. So my students, I just finished doing the curriculum for Out of the Blue with the kiddos, and they loved it and they were fascinated by all the videos and all the different pictures and things. And so I think it's just exposure. At the elementary level, there's also naturally students are exposed to more fiction than nonfiction. Like I just went to a conference and I was the only science presenter there. Everything else was, there was no science even provided there. So I guess my goal is to provide teachers to see that there are these things out there.
I
It's
love
really
that.
it's really a great time for nonfiction too. I mean, it's like a golden age of nonfiction books for kids right now. There are so many beautiful books. They're not dry. They're beautifully illustrated. So they appeal to kids that are visual learners as well as, verbal learners. And a lot of kids really prefer nonfiction. My kids were like that. They wanted to know stuff. They like stories, but they wanted to learn about their world. And they went through phases of being interested in different things. And there's so many beautiful books right now that are available that will meet that hunger that kids have to learn about their worlds.
Yeah. So the hardest thing or the biggest challenge is getting these things into teachers' hands. That's probably
that's right.
Yeah, I was going to ask how this works. Do you distribute the books, or do the schools recommend purchasing it, or how does that work? Or do you have grants that allow you to distribute the books?
So for on the teacher side of it, it kind of varies school to school. But when I was in the gen ed class, we got a budget of $100 to choose how we were going to purchase supplies outside of like standard office supplies and not including curriculum. So in the past, we had bought some of those books. With that money, there's a program or a company called Donors Choose where teachers write grants to get things for their classroom. And I actually have one right now for a bunch of nonfiction books to hopefully get more into my science classroom library. But yeah, teachers definitely have to be resourceful because public schools don't have the funds to get a lot of books. So
that's a really key question. That's a great question, Mariella. Is the problem is if you have a teacher that's not familiar with science or nonfiction books, then they won't tend to get them. They don't have the resources to get them. And then if you don't have a librarian in the school, you know, that's the other thing is what do you do if the school doesn't have a librarian and you don't have any access to these books? So it is an answer, but it's only helpful to try to use nonfiction books to teach language arts if you have nonfiction books in the classroom.
Yeah.
Right.
And one of the things that's been really helpful, that I know Elizabeth and we worked together, that curriculum is all free, and she's made videos for her Out of the Blue book that are all free. And on her website, she has a bibliography of a ton of other nonfiction books, and a bunch of them that include curriculum for teachers. And so those things, because teachers always are looking for the cheap and free access to whatever we can get, those kind of things are really helpful.
Yeah, and this new teacher guide is, of course, available free on my website. But we spent a lot of time putting together these bibliographies of books that have curriculum. And so those are on my website also. So I looked for books that are recent and are easily available. You know, they're published by trade publishers. They're not self-published, or and they have good teacher guides associated with them. So,
Yeah,
but still, the teachers need to have the resources. Teachers should be given lots of money.
yeah, that would be ideal. I was thinking about how to distribute the book in South America. I mean, sloths are South American animals, and a lot of kids in South America don't know about sloths. So on one hand, I mean, it might be a cool book for English classes, so that they could learn English and in parallel learn something about sloths. And the other option would be to translate it into Spanish and or Portuguese, Elizabeth. Have you ever thought about that?
Well, that would be my publisher would have to do that.
So has your publisher ever thought about that?
I'm going to tell him that you said that, Mariella. I'm going to say, Simon, you got to translate this book because Mariella said that she needs to have it in South America.
In your talk, you made it sound as if it were something that you can do, in just a couple of days, but it's a huge amount of work.
Oh, yeah.
So, how long did it take you from the first idea to getting it published? And then how long did it take you to develop all the education materials?
Well, I sort of started writing it just before the pandemic because I realized when I saw Dr. Emily Lindsay at La Brea that her talk at UC Berkeley was something that inspired me. And that was the last thing that we did before the pandemic came down and shut everybody down. So that would have been probably early 2020 or late 2019. So that's how long it took.
Wow.
So it takes years. It takes 3 or 4 years at least. And but then I think the teacher guide, Sierra, was fast, right? Because we kind of knew each other. We had given a couple of presentations and we were on the same wavelength.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say when we started doing Out of the Blue conversations, I had started to see some of the sloth book stuff, and we started talking about what could be ways that we could do it. And then we thought about the tree, and then we started plugging in different aspects of the tree. And then once we had that, I would say it clicked pretty quickly. And I just spent most of the time focusing to making sure it hit standards so that teachers can stand by and say, this is exactly why I'm doing it, and I get to have it in my class. So
yeah, it was pretty much Sierra. We developed that model, and then Sierra sent me the activities, and then I just kind of, tidied him up and made it look good. But she really provided the content. The curriculum for Out of the Blue, I developed. That book came out in 2021, and right in the middle of the pandemic, and I obsessed about the curriculum, made a lot of videos, and Sierra then took my draft and tested it with her students, and she's sending me texts. This worked, that didn't work. Here's a picture. Do this, do that. And so I was like, so that took, I would say that over a year of kind of testing it and refining it. And there were 2 other teachers that also gave me input. So that's a much more complex 6-part curriculum with a video for each one, and almost more than is needed because, you know, a teacher doesn't necessarily have that much time. So we aimed to do a kind of an efficient, flexible, lighter teacher guide for this book.
I don't know if we mentioned, but Out of the Blue is about how animals evolved from the prehistoric season. It's about evolution for elementary school students.
Yes, that's right. It's Out of the Blue, How Animals Evolved from Prehistoric Seas. And it is coming out in paperback, which is exciting, in June 2024. This is actually a paperback, but it's the British, it's published also Walker Books in the UK, and they did a paperback, but now Candlewick Press, the original publisher, is going to do a paperback, and it's illustrated beautifully by Fran Preston Gannon, who's British, and her illustrations, I think, are really gorgeous, and they're child friendly, but they're also quite accurate. So this book took a lot of research to get the illustrations to be correct. But all these books are, every nonfiction writer that I know, and I mean, I'm friends with a lot of them, they are very, very careful to get the information right, because you have a window of opportunity to get to a child, and if it's not good information, you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. You know, I think there's a responsibility there to be accurate and encouraging and foster that interest.
Thank you, Sarah and Elizabeth, for ending our 2023 webinar series.
Hey, congratulations. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. That was really very interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing the book.